Welcome back to another episode of The Founder, a show that features entrepreneurs and their early stories of ingenuity, struggle, and perseverance to get their companies off the ground. We do our best to capture the uncensored, uncovered look behind the curtain into what founders really face when getting started. I'm your host, Kallaway. My guest today started his first business in web design and marketing when he was 17. After a couple of other launch attempts in college, he was able to secure funding for Hublished, a platform that promised to help content producers market their content through webinars. Although Hublished in 2013 was a bit too early for the webinar craze we're seeing today, he was able to meet his co-founder Thor and launch Alpha in 2014. At Alpha, this founder and his team are building and scaling a rapid consumer insights platform that allows teams to quickly gather consumer feedback to make more informed product, marketing, and innovation decisions. Alpha operates as one of the only on-demand solutions for teams to get real insights when either performing consumer discovery research or concept testing different messaging, features, or functionality of a digital product. Here's an example of how Alpha might be used in an organization. Take Nike, for example. Imagine Nike wanted to do research with customers who have bought Nike products in the last 6 months and are 18 to 40 years old. Alpha's platform allows Nike to target a subset of those consumers and then ask them questions, maybe about an upcoming product release or a new user experience flow on their digital app. Previously, this type of research might have taken weeks, but with Alpha, it takes just a couple of days. Today, Alpha has over 70 employees and raised over $20 million to tackle this rapid insight space. This was an eye-opening interview that highlights how traditional industries are getting disrupted by savvy entrepreneurs with tech-enabled solutions. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. Without further ado, the co-founder of Alpha, Nis Frome. Let's get it. Nis, welcome to the show.
Kyle, thanks for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Absolutely. So before we get into the origin story, if you could just give us a snapshot for Alpha of kind of where you are today, kind of mission, vision, what the product looks like, how big you are, just to kind of set the stage.
Sure. Yeah. Alpha is a rapid consumer insights platform for agile teams to make informed decisions in rapidly changing markets and environments, kind of like the one we're in today. We started the business about 5.5 years ago. We're about 70 employees today. Raised over $20 million from leading venture firms. And we are used by product, research, marketing, and innovation teams at some of the world's largest organizations like Uber, Northwestern Mutual, Aetna, Experian, companies like that are generally undergoing a lot of change in their industries. And today, unlike anything anyone's ever seen before.
Awesome. Pumped to get into it. So let's kind of rewind the clock a little bit. Give us kind of in a nutshell your life leading up to kind of post-college, and then what were you working on kind of pre-starting Alpha?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I started my first business when I was 17, my first formal business when I was 17. Even that was kind of iffy in that we had to forge our ages to get an LLC. But yeah, that was web design and marketing, actually kind of at the peak of the recession. And so I got my start in an environment, still nothing like this, but in some ways very similar. We were, all of our customers were like reeling from market disruption, shift to digital, credit crisis and all that. From there, started a couple other companies while in college, one that ended up getting funding, funny enough, in the webinar marketing space. But webinars just didn't take off. Like companies, in fact, the exact opposite. We remember, kind of first-time entrepreneur mistakes is always like your entire slide deck and your entire funding deck is based on like a Gartner report and a Gartner projection, right? And so it was like webinars are going to be the biggest thing by 2018. It's going to be like half of marketing spend is going to move from like physical events and physical marketing to digital, and just never really took off. And there were a bunch of reasons, and I'd be happy to go into that another time. But webinars didn't take off. And the number of texts just I've gotten in the last 2 weeks are like, dude, you were too early to webinars. Like, I'm aware, thanks. Because now, of course, they're, every company, we're doing them at Alpha, and every company's doing webinars now. But they never really took off, and ended up, though, from that startup meeting my co-founder of Alpha, who we started the company with in 2014. So background mostly in marketing, thought leadership, content, that sort of space.
Okay. And your just for reference, your co-founder, where did you meet him? Was he working on a similar thing or at a meetup or?
Came from more of a product development background.
Okay.
So he was at Zynga. He had started another company called Audex Health, which they had sold to United Healthcare, and then had more of a product development background, like agile from a product development world. My background is more agile from like a content and marketing world, where it's been a little bit lagging behind marketing, but is now a lot more agile, and kind of paired with the theory that large companies are going to want to operate a lot like startups do. The lean startup movement was just picking up steam, but we thought there'd be a lot of nuances in the way that corporations would have to adopt these practices, and so we wanted to build the platform for that, which would both facilitate technology to make it possible to make decisions quicker, but also facilitate like the resources and thought leadership. So you may know we have an industry leading podcast called This is Product Management, more than 3 million downloads. So we have a lot of resources like that kind of pair with the technology to provide the best practice and the platform.
Gotcha. So when you think back to kind of the genesis for the idea, obviously that's kind of a framework for what you wanted to build Alpha to solve, but kind of where did that spark come from? Did you guys come together and start brainstorming, or talk us through that story?
No, so my co-founder had already had the idea from just being an agile product leader for a number of years, but then he had done some consulting actually for Fortune 500s, and just saw time and time again that it was all about lowering the cost and increasing the speed of execution, but rarely about like, are we actually building the right thing? And but there was interest. There were champions who were like, hey, before we go and find a dev shop and do a whole build and launch and all the marketing, like we've been burned now a few times in this whole digital world. Maybe we should figure out how to get it right before we build it. And I think my co-founder saw an opportunity to really platform productize, I guess, that capability.
Yeah. And was that key insight primarily based on concept testing, product testing, or did you have? Because I know the Alpha platform today. I've used it kind of for my other career,
Sure.
and we do kind of the consumer discovery as well as the concept testing. Can you talk about kind of that early insight? What was that based on, and how that evolved?
Yeah, so it really evolved out of first the video gaming world. So my co-founder was a product leader at Zynga, where they A/B tested kind of to oblivion sometimes. But anyone who has a family member who is addicted to Farmville knows.
Yeah.
So it's every day it was a different color tractor that you could spend 4 cents on. And so they A/B tested a lot there. And then when he went into a healthcare environment, he realized that the whole concept testing kind of breaks down in a regulated environment where you have HIPAA compliance and just different sorts of regulations and privacy concerns, makes it really, really hard to ship and iterate quickly. So he built like basically a different methodology for doing concept testing and user discovery. So it was like born out of concept testing, out of rapid concept testing. But when you sell to the Fortune 500, as we do, you realize that before you get to concept testing, you actually have to like validate that the pain points are there, because often they're actually not, like the wrong problem is being solved. So we do have a platform that informs common learning objectives throughout the product development lifecycle, beginning with pain points and better understanding your market, all the way to like refining the concept and experience.
Gotcha. And when you think back to the early days in terms of like socialization, so he had this idea, you guys teamed up. Where was he in the development of the early kind of first stage prototype? And then did you guys socialize it early on, or do you kind of go under wraps for a certain period of time and then pop up with a more fleshed out version?
Yeah, it's a great question. We actually did something that I've seen a few other B2B software companies do. We actually started as a consulting business. Actually, even before this, he had already had a consulting business. So that's what we partnered on for the first few months. It was a basically innovation studio, and took we basically told the customers and all the clients he had and said, hey, we're going to be pivoting to really just focusing on the what we called product validation space, right? So anyone who just wanted like rapid insight, and it literally looked like this. It was a shared spreadsheet. It was like, you give us a plain English learning objective question, like, do people like this concept? Do people have this problem? What problems do people have with this app or this experience? And within 5 days, we will get you a report on all of that. And that's what we sold to those customers. And then once we got some validation there, we like spun up a website, spun up a C Corp and all that. And I actually started like cold emailing other companies.
And what were you guys doing on the back end when it was just a spreadsheet? And during those magic 5 days, like what were you doing to get those responses? Were you guys pounding the pavement or plugging into sample providers?
Yeah, our secret sauce. It was SurveyMonkey, user testing, AYTM, Craigslist to source people. We were doing like the whole shebang.
Yeah,
It would be it's kind of like your podcast here. If someone was like, "Hey, go interview a founder and come back to me at the end of the week," like you'd buy a whole bunch of equipment, set it up in your house, like get it recorded, and like be done and be like, "Here you go, here's the file." And
exactly.
these were business teams, these were agile teams, right? They needed to make decisions, and they didn't really care to some extent how that data got there. They just needed it by the end of the week because they had 40 developers in a shop like waiting for the next spec.
Yeah. And what was that time frame? How long did you guys do that more like manual kind of churn hidden behind until you built kind of a consumer facing website platform?
Yeah, yeah. So it was all done iteratively. So pretty early on, we had switched from a spreadsheet to like a WordPress site where like the customer logged in and could just see like their PDFs were there, and then they could submit a question from there. Just we got an email, and then they got their PDFs a week later. Um, we chipped away at it, and we're still chipping away at it. There's still some aspects of it that are manual. So we're chipping. We've chipped away at it over the years from like publishing charts instead of PDFs, having better intake forms, automating some of the test scripting, the audience sourcing, the analysis of data. So all that stuff is like we kind of attacked it. But what we focused on day one is like, what are the learning objectives they have? How can we better sell and align with those learning objectives, figure out the value prop there? And then the back end is stuff, we would just figure out because that's what you do when you build technology.
Yeah. And did you notice any themes like early on? People were coming to you with the same type of questions. They obviously like concept testing, but breaking that down, like were there the same types of questions people were asking? Like what intrigued you about the type of research they were trying to do?
Yeah, it's a great question. We actually have a product manager who does like a tech talk on this, on like the diverge, right? And so we learned about 2 years in that there were 6 test types that uh, that agile teams had, from like pain point, competitive overview, concept test, feature prioritization, refining the UX, and then actual usability. And so our platform for a long time kind of mapped to that. Um, the industry has changed dramatically because agile teams are much savvier. They initially did testing as like an initial project, and now it's like more of an ongoing and continuous mindset. And also the learning objectives have gotten a little bit more nuanced. We're seeing testing applied to go-to-market messaging. We're seeing testing applied to like ideation phases. So we're seeing a lot go on there. So now the platform is a little bit more sophisticated for those sort of learning objectives. But yeah, we definitely noticed a standardization over the years.
With all the evolution of these like self-service platforms that all these, legacy sample providers are trying to build to keep up with the new technologies, what's keeping these teams other than like lack of awareness of what's out there, negligence, from just doing this themselves without having like a partner like Alpha?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'd say it's 3 things. First is I talked about earlier, is that we're also a thought leadership source of thought leadership and a partner for a lot of our customers, right? Because a lot of this is stuff, to some extent they could do once or twice on their own, but they're trying to drive behavior change at their companies. They're trying to democratize research and democratize, customer centricity, or just even caring at all what the market says, right? And so that's not something, if you want to drive that change, it's not something that doing a single test or a single experiment is going to help. You need like a partner who can throw resources behind that initiative, right? And so that's first. Second is that we are we are a great solution for regulated environments and for companies going digital for the first time. So a lot of media companies, for example, especially right now, NBC's releasing Peacock, and they're going digital and they're going direct to consumer. Sometimes for the first time, these companies, right? And so they need a platform that is designed for those use cases, for that sort of regulatory environment, for their compliance, where they might want to run experiments without their brand. Alpha helps them run like brandless tests as well. It's kind of built-in capability. And then the last is that we are designed for those workflows and for those learning objectives. A lot of companies are cognizant that they just don't want to reinvent the wheel. They want to use like something at least turnkey where it's like, you tell us what all these other companies are doing in very similar environments. We want to do that with some mild configuration rather than like we want a blank canvas and we want to screw it up ourselves.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about for the people listening, like the unit economics for Alpha. So early on, it seemed self-explanatory. You had consulting clients; they would come to you, they'd ask you questions. But as the platform grew, like talk about what do you get out of a test? Like how many questions you can ask, how many people you get responding, and then how many tests do people run on average? Like talk about those kind of unit economics.
Yeah, so Alpha's turnkey solution is pretty straightforward. It was historically you just buy one test at a time, and that was a subscription. You got unlimited tests in the year, one at a time. Tests today turn around in about 3 days, and our goal for the end of the year is to be under 2 days. And that each test, depending on the test type, is somewhere between 5 to 10 questions, which are survey questions. They could be, text response like open-ended response, matrix, rate and explain, anything like that. And then depending on the test type, you might also get unmoderated user sessions. So it's actually like a user recording their screen, going through a concept, speaking out loud, giving their reactions. And then you'd get those charts. And then there's, depending on the type of insight, there might be some data analysis tools as well to go along with it. Anything from a word cloud and term frequency to like a chi-squared analysis to understand if there's anything significant in terms of differences in demographic breakdown of responses. And then you could slice one question by another and, some of the more straightforward and some of the more advanced data analysis. For our larger customers and more recently, our buyer has shifted sometimes from an agile team individually to more of like the head of consumer insights or a consumer insights team or a market research team that's really got a mandate to democratize agile research and insights across the business. So obviously there it gets a little bit more sophisticated in those enterprise deals where they might just buy a bulk number of tests and a much higher concurrency, which is the number of tests they can run at a time when they're servicing a whole bunch of business teams. So, we have customers with hundreds of different product managers and designers on the platform, and it's all centrally managed and configured by a research team that they can configure the analysis tools to what they need. They can even create their own test templates as well if they don't want the ones that come out of the box or if they want to add to those. So there's some more configuration for some of the larger adoption, but generally it works right out of the box or if you want to get more advanced.
And talk a little bit about how the magic works, right? How do you get all those responses in 3 days? I'm assuming you're plugged into a network of sample providers, but there's a lot that goes on in the background. Do you want to take us through kind of under the hood what happens?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the simplest form, like, yeah, we have relationships with all the basically market research panel providers, which have in recent years built programmatic access tools. So, you come in as a product manager and say, you want to target people. I saw a test today that was people who are between certain ages and have anxiety and have purchased a CBD drink in the last 3 months, right? It's very common right now, I imagine. And so the platform will turn that into like, okay, there's ages, there's a screening question. It'll, bid on different audiences from different panel providers and then efficiently source that audience. Of course, it gets a lot more complicated than that because you want to do certain things around balancing gender and different demographic criteria. You want to do things like quality control. Are people who they say they are, like digital fingerprinting, CAPTCHA, all the way to like, are these responses high quality? Do they actually answer the question? Are people just snoozing, copying and pasting, all sorts of things? So there happens to be like a lot of quality assurance. So we have a whole data science team that's pretty focused on this. It is like one of the biggest parts of our business is audience sourcing. And it's kind of goes back to your earlier question of like, why wouldn't someone do this themselves? Like, yeah, anyone could hook up to a programmatic research provider, but like, you're going to build quite amount of infrastructure on top of that to make it fit your needs. So that's some of the stuff that goes on behind the scenes.
Gotcha. So hopefully, there'll be founders or potential founders who are building B2B products. So I'm curious if you could dive into like the customer acquisition process. Again, early on for you guys, starting with a consulting business, I think is a genius idea because you already have that pipeline, you already have kind of validated product. But when you started to scale up, what was the process like to find those like first initial customers? Like what were some of the pushback items that they brought to you when you were negotiating deals early on or trying to like sell them on the platform? And what do you think ultimately put you over the edge with some of those?
Yeah, I think it's really important for founders to think this through because something we've seen, and obviously there's a whole book, Crossing the Chasm, and many companies could talk about it. Like, our initial buyers look very, very different than our buyers do today, and I just kind of talked through some of those differences between selling to product team and selling to consumer insights teams. So it's very different. I think early on, if you have to demo to get a sale, you're probably either too early for the market or just misaligned a little bit. Like that's kind of the criteria I would use for like if you're really onto something because our early buyers, like the moment we said product validation or rapid experimentation, like these are people that read the lean startup, tried applying it in their own Fortune 500 business units, and we're just like, this doesn't work. We need someone who is speaking our language, like someone who is like, we're going to provide product validation, rapid experimentation to the Fortune 500. And we would start there, talk a little bit about our vision, and they were basically like already bought in. Like the technology was really secondary. They just wanted a partner. And I talk to a lot of companies, and that's similarly the case. When it just clicks, you're like, let's make this work. We'll write a check. We want to invest in it. The classic innovator, classic like very, very early adopter. Those were the initial. And where we got them was they were going to like industry specific innovation conferences. They were listening to our podcast. They were like, if we published like a product management article about how Fortune 500 experimentation has to differ from the lean startup, like they were the first person to comment on it. So that's what it looks and feels like to be really, really early. Now, of course, the problem there, it's, it sounds great and like everyone would love that for anything they're working on. The problem is, of course, they would buy it and then they would roll it out to their teams and their teams were like, we don't get it. So we had a very, very heavy emphasis on customer onboarding, customer success early on, extremely high emphasis. Today, it's completely flipped. Now it's very nuanced buying process with a platform by platform comparison and feature comparison and compliance checks, and the customer onboarding is now much easier. Like people there get it. They're much more in a testing mindset. Of course, there's education. Of course, every company is on different spectrum in terms of maturity. Every team and individual as well. But this, in 5 years, we've seen the market completely shift from like a champion who wants it to a team not getting it to a team that wants it and gets it to a champion who's like price shopping and comparison shopping.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was going to say early on. How much did you struggle where you were finding that champion and then you'd get the subscription monthly or whatever, and then it wouldn't be used, or people like they needed it but they didn't know how to use it or didn't want to implement it in their workflow? Like what were you doing to work with those teams to kind of spin that up?
Yeah, that very much describes the early days, what it was like. You'd have a champion who like was just like, if you can get my teams to use this, like we're good to go forever. Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of thought leadership. So the content like was literally integrated into the platform. So, our podcast, our content was like there. So it was like kind of a reminder to like log in and get the podcast and all that through that. We scheduled, we had heroic account management and customer success teams. They scheduled weekly calls. We set the expectation very early on that this was going to take behavior change. And I think that made it a little bit easier for a lot of our customers because they knew that it was like taking their vitamins to some extent. They needed to build habits around it and that they wouldn't, like getting customer data. I think one of the things that companies struggle with is it's a leading indicator for success, not a lagging. Like your revenue is a lagging indicator. Getting your lunch eaten by Netflix or Amazon is a lagging indicator. The leading indicator is caring about customers, right? And so they'd get this customer data and they're like, so what do we do with it? It's like you make a decision, then they're like, so what? And then like, then you build something, so what? Then you launch something, so what? And then like down 6 to 9 months down the line, potentially longer than that, customers would actually like benefit and then they pay you for it. But we had a massive lag by the time you took your vitamin and running a test in alpha to the time you actually saw results in the market. So that was the challenge then. Today, the nice thing about having more competition and more kind of activity in the space is that there's at least some element of ROI that is around cost savings and efficiency. So if they believe they can onboard their teams faster to us versus another platform, if they can get adoption and run more tests and make more decisions, because they already now have a line item for data-driven decision making, or I'm sure it's called something else, but they have a line item for that. So as long as we're more efficient, more effective, more powerful for that, then that's the ROI rather than upfront where it was like a much more aspirational ROI. So pros and cons to both. Our demand gen and our lead gen today is a little bit more traditional. It's events, webinars, cold outreach, any, I don't know that we've necessarily like reinvented the wheel. So it's like a lot of the standard stuff you'd see in B2B SaaS. So it's a trade-off. Like I'd say there's like 1 year we got in the middle where there's like the buyers were there, the competition wasn't there, and that was like the sweet spot. So I would recommend to any founder, like get as much out as you can out of that sweet spot.
Yeah, squeeze that as hard as you can.
Yeah.
Another thing that I love talking about is kind of the marketing. And I think content marketing is so important. Like, so you guys did that really well. You were there early, you were there often. The podcast is huge. Companies like Buffer, right? Buffer did the same thing and they exploded in social media management. How strategic were you guys about that? Or did it just evolve over time? I don't know if one of the people on their team early on liked podcasts and wanted to start it. Talk about that a little bit.
So I'd like to think it was pretty strategic. I
Yeah.
guess that's always a matter of perspective. So I'll tell you at least with the podcast. Your listeners aren't going to like this, but I don't listen to podcasts. I don't really like podcasts. I'm just not an audio learner. I learn by doing things. I could listen to an hour-long podcast and then at the end remember like zero things. Like it just in one ear out the other. So I guess the point here is that like we didn't create a podcast because we were interested in podcasts or we love podcasts. We created one because we did a survey and we just talked to the market. So we did a lot of happy hours in the early days to like meet product people. We did a survey and we just noticed this really interesting thing. Um, we had asked a lot of people like, okay, like where are you from? What states are you from? What sort of like resources and where do you get your best practice content? And then when do you read it? And we noticed something that in hindsight is very obvious, but at the time was like novel. Almost all product managers were in New York or San Francisco. Okay, makes sense. That's kind of where it started. Almost all of them read books and the Lean Startup because that's all there was. And then almost all of them did it on their commutes. And we said, oh crap, the entire market for product managers is in the two cities with really long commutes, right? San Francisco and New York, and everyone's like on a train or in a car forever, and podcasts are perfect for that. So that's kind of how we came up with the podcast. We just recorded 3 episodes. We tested it with some people. They seemed to like it, although going back to listen to the first three episodes is kind of painful now. I think they were recorded in like loud kitchens with tons of background noise, and so
Yeah. Hopefully mine won't be like that.
no, yours is much, much better. I think our like third guest was Nir Ayal, right as he had like just published his first book. We met him at a meetup and we just like recorded it on the spot. And yeah, we launched on Product Hunt and it just kind of took off. I mean, we were solving a real problem. I think the survey data and the initial testing gave us evidence of that. But then we launched it. We iterated on the episodes like ruthlessly. You'll notice that they changed like every 20 or 30 episodes. We roll out a bunch of updates from like, and then a website, show notes, better introductory questions, better questions at the end, better editing, better sound quality. So just iteratively made improvements, kind of treated it like a product. We've done that also with our Medium publication. We do executive video interviews. So we have a number of different resources out there that are popular to our different sort of audiences. And I'd like to think it was pretty strategic, but definitely, we were also to some extent in the right place, the right time with podcasts.
Yeah. How do you guys think about innovation? So I know it's a buzzword and a catch-all these days, but at Alpha, do you have a team that's kind of dedicated towards disrupting and thinking differently and trying to build things that break stuff? And or is that kind of a part of your like core values across the company? Kind of how do you think about that?
Yeah, we think about it in both ways. Experimentation is actually one of our company values, along with adventurousness. So you can definitely get some fun behaviors when you combine those two. To say the least. We did have an experimentation team. Actually, I ran that team for about a year, and we then combined it into the product team, which I run now as well. So it's all in one, and it's just product managers. We don't have a designation for innovation or experimentation. I think there were things that worked and things that didn't work, and I think in a certain environment it could work to have a separate innovation team. In a certain environment, it wouldn't. I think you have to have really, really strong product market fit with a platform or a very strong product, and have the resources to not only improve that but also innovate. And I just think we were a little early there. We were basically we often came to decisions of like we had validated things on our core product and validated opportunities on the innovation space, and it was like which is which. So we did what most people do, which is split resources, and then just kind of both things moved a little slowly. And so we just decided to combine it and focus on one at a time. And so sometimes we're doing one, sometimes we're doing the other. But it was just kind of like figuring out resource allocation otherwise was very difficult as two separate teams.
Makes sense. I want to talk about competition a little bit. So this space, the consumer research space, is, in my mind, there's a new player popping up all the time, right? Like no free ads, but you got Perksy, Dscout, user testing, all these different Suzy, all these different players.
Sure.
And I think it's important to note, I think Alpha is a combination of features of some, and then obviously you have some special sauce that no one does. How often, I guess, when you talk to customers, are they aware of these other players? Do they know? And how do you differentiate between them?
Yeah, sure. That's a good question. I think that's an important topic for a lot of founders to think about, right? So, there's different schools of thoughts in terms of competition, like obsess over them, don't obsess over them, give them time of day, don't. You know, I am personally of the mindset of like information on the internet is free. Like, you're not going to hide competition. So I'm pretty straightforward. And maybe the sales team doesn't love when I'm on prospective customer calls because I will literally just recommend a different tool if I think it's a better fit. So I just think it's honest. And sometimes I'll recommend another solution. People will insist on buying Alpha, right? And that's fine by all means as well. But I'm kind of like, people are going to find out that people also change companies all the time, and they're going to get exposure to every tool anyway. I want a customer who we are the right solution for them. There's good fit, and that there's going to be a good long-term partnership. So that's just kind of my view. And I I also angel invest in businesses. I advise another business, and I encourage kind of the same mindset there. And I've seen companies have a lot of success with that when they like just truly can recommend the competition for certain use cases is great because it's how you differentiate. And if you get to a point where you're like, wait a minute, I'm recommending the competition too often, like great, that's you should be the first one to know you have a problem. You shouldn't be the last one to know, right? So I personally like knowing the competition better than the competition knows themselves, and I like knowing the customer better than the customer knows themselves. So that's my view on it. In terms of us, like where we play, I think if you want to scale agile research in a business, that's a very, very different problem to solve than doing a very in-depth study once or specializing in one type of research. So you mentioned some tools there. Like if you want to do longitudinal diary studies and really track like really deeply and ethnographically understand a user and a segment over time, like we're not the right solution for that. And by all means, I think that's important. We do it at Alpha. So we do that sort of studies at Alpha. So by all means, it's like a really important form of research. However, if you're in a company going through a digital transformation, you've retrained 150 project managers and business analysts to be product managers, and for the first time, they have to do discovery and really get market feedback. Like those tools are not going to scale for that. Like that's just not going to work. You're going to need a platform that is designed for people who need to introduce this into their workflows, so that it works from 0 to 1, but then it also works from 1 to scale as they embed this into their workflows. And you need your consumer insights team to kind of manage the entire process, configure it to your organization's needs, and then rescale it back and reprovision it back to all those teams. Alpha fits from that 0 to 1 use case and that 1 to scale use case in a way that a lot of other solutions don't. So it's really just a different sort of challenge. And honestly, a lot of our customers use both solutions. Like the consumer insights team might use 5 or 6 different tools, but when they're scaling out to all these agile teams, Alpha is their solution.
When you think about Alpha today, what is the one or two, and it may be more, but areas in the product that you most would like to see improved, most would like to see iterated on?
Yeah, I would love to. That's a great question. I could give you a long list right now, but I'll focus on your question one or two. So I would love to get even more deeply integrated into our customers' workflows. 5 years ago, our customers were using, like Microsoft Office, right, to manage roadmaps. Yeah, Excel sheets to manage roadmaps. Like that's not the case today. They're using really, really great solutions out there from Atlassian to Product Board, right? So we'd like to get like more deeply integrated into that. So if you add something to your backlog, like one click, boom, run an experiment, run a test on that, and see what a target audience thinks about it. So you can just at least start to inform things as early as your backlog and prioritize from there. And then once you're, right before development, once you're in development, once you're post development, like I think there's a lot of great solutions we can integrate with from your roadmap to your analytics tool. So you can see we can prioritize what you haven't yet built, as well as kind of grade your decision-making ability and how testing is correlating with success in the market. So I'd say that's first. Second, we want to give more love to our consumer insights teams that are using us, and really they have a really challenging but fantastic objective of scaling agile research and agile insights across their businesses. So we'd like to be able to deliver on that value proposition as well, make it easier for, I think something that's really interesting that's going to really define the space in the coming years is making discoverability of an insight that another team generates much easier. Create serendipity across a large organization amongst people who may not know each other, but are generating data and making decisions with the same tool. So if I'm in a healthcare organization, I'm targeting a population with Medicaid, but someone else also did it, and they're testing some messaging that might be helpful to me, I can maybe subscribe to that. So I think that's kind of the future, and something I'd love to be able to work more on.
Yeah, that kind of blends well with the next question, which is, what's your outlook on where you think this industry is going? So the traditional sample providers are getting squeezed, obviously, and there's been so much technological disruption in the space. But when you look 5, 10, 15 years out, what's your take on what the industry looks like?
Yeah. So, 5, 10 years out, I think the 0 to 1 space is kind of commoditized. I think, everyone will be running tests, kind of like today. Everyone is doing roadmaps and everyone has an analytics tool. Like an analytics tool is a commodity, right? I think it gets into scale, being able to scale, and scale is kind of a buzzword. So I'll get more specific. I think standardization, what a lot of businesses want to be able to do is compare decisions apples to apples across the business, so that if you run a concept test in one department, you can kind of cross-reference that and juxtapose that to a concept test in another department. Because at the end of the day, you're all competing over resources. So if there are two really great ideas, you want to kind of dig a little deeper and be like, okay, which one really shows the most promise? Because if as companies shift to digital, which every company has in the last 2 weeks, and companies become more customer centric and have that relationship, that direct relationship with customers, like there's going to be a lot of data. And the problem won't be about generating data. The problem will be about prioritizing what to do, given that you have all these opportunities in front of you.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And we'll get to a little bit later. We'll get to kind of what you think the alpha vision for the future looks like. So I'll save that one. But the next one, I want to talk about funding a little bit. So a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs listening around that I think could benefit from hearing your words of wisdoms and lessons learned around funding. So I know you guys have raised a ton of money through several rounds. You want to take us through that process? Maybe you can chronicle the different stages and different things you learned.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll talk about alpha, and then happy to kind of dive into some more thoughts around fundraising. But yeah, so for us, early on, it was angel investors who, we had relationships with and who believed in the vision. And then was our Series Seed investor, which is Spider Capital out on the West Coast, there in LA and San Francisco. He's a really great investor, really focuses on early stage, focuses on the sorts of enterprise software ideas that you would say, like, no one's going to buy that. But,
People do.
if you're early enough, that is the response that people should have, right? Like, that's what it means to be a Series Seed investor, right? And so, I think our pitch was something like on demand or real time user insights for rapid experimentation. It was like no one was buying any word in that sentence, right? But he had understood the lean movement and felt like that was going to lead to something, and so that was our investor. And then our Series A was done by Calibrate out of LA and Crosslink Capital out of San Francisco, and then we just did an extension to that round 3 months ago. So good timing all around. And so yeah, those with the same investors again. And so that was our experience with it. And the Series A was more about having product market fit and then scaling and building regional teams and offices. So now we have teams in LA and Chicago and San Francisco, mostly on the go-to-market side.
Cool. And talk a little bit about that extension. So what's the difference between doing a Series A extension versus going for another round, or is it purely just timing and need for capital?
It's a great question. I think, some of it's timing, some of it's semantics, some of it's, valuation. There's a number of considerations. And I think largely you're seeing in the whole industry, all the kind of naming schema is being thrown off a little. Your Series C today are, larger than Series A's 3-4 years ago. So it's all kind of thrown off right now. But I think, if you look at like what the traditional, so to speak, is, Series A is to fund product market fit, and Series B is to like scale product market fit, or, introduce a second product, or kind of operationalize the business, go international, something like that.
Hmm.
So I think for us, we felt we were a little in between, mostly because of how quickly the market has evolved, in that consumer insights teams are really passionate about what we're doing and want to partner with us in a way that we didn't necessarily anticipate 5 years ago. We really felt we were going to go business unit to business unit and not necessarily have this, centralized team in consumer insights want to scale agile research. And so that's been a really exciting opportunity for us. And that's obviously required a number of changes to our product and our product strategy. And so I think the fundraising just really reflected that. Like, we're going to take a little bit of a turn here for something that's even potentially more exciting than the direction we were going, and more scalable from our end, and just kind of push off a much larger round until we could get this bulk of work done. Because obviously, if we execute on it, then the entire valuation of the entire business looks fundamentally different.
Yeah. So to get those investors in, there's obviously a lot that bowed out. So do you have any lessons learned around things you learned from pitches that didn't go your way? I'm sure they evolved over time, but um, key learnings, insights.
So in terms of, investors and finding investor fit, I think there's a number of things that are really important, from alignment, not just on the vision, because like presumably they're not going to invest otherwise, but really alignment on like the culture and the way you want to operate the business. Because, your investors, especially the ones on the board, are going to be involved in executive hiring. They're going to be involved in like, some critical decisions around future investments, both like that you take from fundraising, but also investments in initiatives in the business. Like you asked me earlier, building an innovation team. Like, well, your investors probably have a viewpoint on that. And I'm not saying during the pitch to really bring that up, but like during the diligence process and before is the time to like build that relationship and kind of mind meld on business philosophy and startup philosophy. Do your investors want you to be profitable sooner, later, post IPO? Do they want you to IPO? Do they want you to sell? Right? Like those are. It's just good to have, to not just build the relationship, not just be aligned on the vision, not just be aligned on the product, but also be aligned on like actual business philosophy.
So given that you kind of angel invest on the side, you want to talk a little bit about that and kind of what your criteria are for the different opportunities you look at, and I don't know how much you could share about what you're in and not in, but
Sure.
any insight there would be great as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, obviously, my perspective is informed by things I've seen, right? And so it's a few fold. One, my focus is on future of work and that sort of area. That's just the area I know. So I probably won't be investing in like a CPG or anything like that. But so we see a lot in the future of work. I think our thesis, I co-invest with a couple buddies. Our thesis is really the reverse of the automation thesis. So I think in anything, especially angel investing, there's kind of two competitive advantages you could have, right? The first is deal flow, which is, the best entrepreneurs are going to have networks and they're going to go to the same people over and over. So like if Travis Kalanick comes to me with virtually any idea, I'm going to write a check. So step one of doing angel investing is to know the best and the most successful entrepreneurs. Step two is, obviously to be early, but to also have some sort of contrarian thesis, like to somehow have a perspective that everyone else doesn't have, because otherwise you're just going to be behind on virtually everything. So our thesis is really the opposite of automation. Like we actually think most things will not be automated. We think things that are, we call it like what we call scaling artisanal. So it's about things that don't look scalable at all, but are actually interestingly scalable. So I'll give you a couple examples. We did a company actually just 2 weeks ago called Room Service, which we're really excited about. And they built, using some of the latest JavaScript technology, a way to build real-time collaboration into any app incredibly easily. So if you're familiar with like Figma or Notion or even Google Docs, like that capability of like three people on a document at the same time is incredibly difficult. They built an amazing way to do that really, really easily. And so we invest in them. And that's something that like, most people, first of all, we're betting on like real-time collaboration and humans doing like working together.
Which I think is a fair bet.
Yeah, fair bet, especially right now. And then, this thing that, you would think every company is going to, build themselves or is going to be so easy. It's like actually a really hard problem to solve. And like companies are just not like, it's millions of dollars to build, high fidelity functionality around that. So investing in that. We did another company that does personalized benefits at scale. So it lets individuals like customize their own wellness and kind of, right now wellness from home, work from home benefits.
That's pretty cool.
It reads their credit card transactions kind of using a Plaid integration and then reimburses them for qualifiable purchases. That company's called June. And so that's really exciting. Like for us, there's, if you look at like the big benefits and that come with your health insurance, it's like this laundry list document that no one's going to sign up for. It comes with gym memberships that you can spend 2 hours getting reimbursed. This thing is like invisible. You integrate it once and you just get automatically reimbursed for anything that qualifies. So
That's awesome.
if you have remote employees all over the world that have different gyms and different meditation apps that work for them, they can all have their own set of benefits completely personalized and they can get it approved instantly. So it's a lot of stuff like that. There's automation and there's customization as a component of the companies, but it's really about creating kind of artisanal experiences at scale.
And are these companies seed stage, like early, or a little bit, they have product market fit to an extent?
No, they're all pre-seed. We like to be the first check, or we just pass usually. So I would say, so all of them are pre-seed. They're all safes, which is a common San Francisco investment vehicle, and they're all, I think, all but one. No, two had revenue, two did not have revenue, and then we're looking at 2 to 3 more. And typically we prefer like, just about at prototype stage.
Okay, that's awesome. A question on alpha around equity. So you definitely don't have to disclose anything you don't want to, but I think it'd be valuable for people to hear any lessons learned you have around, you guys may have made a mistake or not, or thought a certain way around giving up too much, or you built an employee pool. Just like anything you have to share around equity would be valuable.
Yeah, that's a great question. So again, I will speak for myself, and because there's, as reasonably at any company, there's going to be multiple viewpoints. So we do have an employee pool, and we do, as part of it's a component of everyone's compensation to have upside skin in the game, not really downside skin in the game. So on a technicality, I don't know that it really qualifies as skin in the game, but has upside in the business's success, and I think that's a healthy perspective because, if people contribute to the success of something, it's reasonable that they should be able to see the upside in it. I personally have a couple of views that complicate this. First is that a cap table is incredibly difficult to communicate from legal and tax perspectives, and it creates a lot of confusion and misalignment in terms of what people think they have versus what they think they're getting. It could be more, it could be less. And I think what this pandemic in particular has shown everyone is that nothing is guaranteed. So we are very fortunate to be in a market that is actually growing during this time. Shifting to digital research and rapid consumer insights is like good industry to be in right now. But, just tell some of the early employees at Airbnb, they thought they had $1 million in equity, and now they may never get anything because actually in their case, that equity expires after 10 years, and Airbnb had to IPO this year to meet that deadline, and they're not going to be able to.
Wow,
So
I did not know that.
yeah,
That's crazy.
it's a catastrophe for them.
So
right?
does that convert at all, or it's completely useless?
No, it expires. So I mean, they may find a way to compensate those employees, but complete legal and tax disaster, right? And so there's just no sure thing. So my view is a couple things. First is comp is your pay, your salary, and bonus perhaps, but like that's got to work for you, especially once you're at Series A. Before that, maybe there's a component. It's reasonable that there's sweat equity and all that when you're talking about like a sizable chunk of the business. But after that, like your comp's got to work for you. If you're moving to New York City and you're paying for an apartment, like you have to be able to eat, you have to be able to survive. Like if you're betting on your 1,000 shares, of which you have no idea how many shares are in the company, you have no idea what the latest
Valuation.
the valuation, you have no idea of anything. Like
Yeah.
that's not paying your rent, and that may never pay for anything. But maybe it's a car, maybe it's a house, maybe more. But like that, you can't really factor that in. I would say, though, that any equity is better than a company that doesn't do equity at all, because that's kind of, I think there's something strange about not giving upside to employees. So I guess where I'm getting to is like, if you're going to give equity to employees, it has to come with some aspect of transparency and communication as well. Even if it is just generic, like bring in Carta and bring in, a consultant to explain to employees how options and equity works. Because I'll tell you what happens. Your more junior employees, what they do is they go to their parents, and their parents work in Fortune 500s where they have 401ks and they've restricted stock units. So one of two things will happen. They will think that your options are restricted stock units, so they'll ask you to go ask for, the stock price and all the questions. They'll ask you, you won't be able to give them an answer, and they'll go back to their parents, and their parents will say your company lies and isn't transparent. Or the other thing that will happen is that their parents will just devalue it entirely and just be like, why does your company not offer a 401k? Right? And then you will be in the position where you're offering both a 401k and the stock options and kind of defeating the purpose of the whole thing. So that's kind of where I'm getting at. Is like I'm a proponent of equity. I'm a proponent of giving people upside in the business, but also like reasonable transparency so they can financially plan and just have an understanding of like what the situation is.
Yeah. And the last question I'll ask about equity, when you guys were, and I'm sure this changes through stage, but was your mentality throughout, let's conserve as much as we possibly can? Or was there ever a inflection point where you like, look, we know we want to conserve, we know we want to be stingy, but like this is a key point for the business where we need an infusion of capital that will help us level up? Like how did you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I don't think that we did really anything out of the ordinary. I think the venture market is pretty mature at this point that most firms will advocate for a pretty standard um, employee pool because they understand it's a key component of incentivizing, especially director and above talent, the future. At which point the conversations do get a little bit more detailed and more granular at the equity level. So I don't think we did anything out of the ordinary. Generally in most fundraising rounds, there's some sort of pool. It's either created or adjusted, and I think we were pretty much, I would say, in the average for that.
If you were to kind of manifest where you think alpha, where you want alpha to be in 10, 15 years, what does that look like?
10, 15 years. That is way out. I would say,
Or 5?
5 years. Yeah, 10 to 15. I hope there's still an internet at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, 5 years. This is a great question. So I think that we want to continue to solve higher order problems. So that's from like a what our business should be doing is like solving higher order problems, which I talked about. Like right now, it's democratizing research. In the future, it'll be democratizing insights. And then I think in the future that it's like facilitating a level of collaboration and kind of co-creation with customers that we typically say is like we want to bring Amazon's DNA or whatever the most forward-thinking, most innovative company's DNA. We want to bring that to any company in the world. I think that's what our platform was built to do, to democratize and make that capability accessible to any company, no matter the industry, no matter the regulations or the skill sets or the capabilities. I think that's kind of fundamentally what technology does. One of my favorite quotes is to be cliche here, is a Steve Jobs quote, which is "Computer is the bicycle of the mind." So I think every entrepreneur really has to think through that lens, like what are you building technology to give someone leverage to do? So in our case, it's the leverage to be like Amazon or to be like Netflix. So that's from a business standpoint, what we want to be doing in 5 years. From like culture and ethos, I've always thought the PayPal mafia was really cool. Like my goal, is to personally angel invest in at least 10 former Alpha employees one day who are building their own companies and having their own success. So even if Alpha fails, I would like for that to happen. Like that to me is really important to build that sort of culture of future business leaders and executives who, will continue to change the world.
So let's shift a little bit, although some of these questions are still kind of, related to alpha in a way. But so the first kind of subsection is around hiring. So I think, and I've said this on this show a bunch, I think hiring is the most important thing you could do. If you get rock stars, it exponentially increases your output potential. So I'm interested in your hiring process. So when you try to bring somebody on, what are the key characteristics you're looking for outside of kind of functional requirements that really make somebody stand out?
Yeah, that's great. Um, I kind of view hiring similarly to competition. The question you asked before is like I'm pretty cognizant, at least again until recently. I think a lot of recent things I gotta rethink some strategies. Given that half the companies we were competing with, like, or at least in terms of talent in the labor market, are like completely shut down right now. But I view it the same way. Like I presume that any rock star is going to have 6 or 7 other offers or opportunities at various stages. So I think for me, the most important thing in interviews is mutual fit, right? Which isn't just are they a rock star to us, but are we a rock star to them, or could we be a rock star to them? So that gets at a variety of things. So the sorts of questions I ask and the sorts of things I look for, like what other opportunities are you looking at? Not specifically the titles and the companies, but like what do you want to be doing in 2 to 3 years? What sort of company are you looking at? Big companies, small companies? Like I'll give you an example. I wrote an article about this on how we differentiate our employer brand around adventurousness. Like if I get the sense, or if a candidate just outright tells me like they're interviewing for a role at Google or Facebook, like we're just not a fit. I'll just be like, by all means, good luck, get a job there. But like we're not a fit because we're offering a completely different set of opportunities to that. We're first of all offering half as much money, and second of all, offering like you're going to make an impact. You're going to do a lot of work. You're going to break code on the site, and you're going to ship bugs to customers, and they're going to yell at you, and you're going to have to deal with that, and you're going to have to go through that. That's not going to happen at Facebook or Google, right? Like you're going to have a completely different. They're going to do your laundry for you. Like it's a completely different world. Like so, I look for mutual fit in terms of like what opportunities people are looking for, what are they looking to do in 2 years, what motivates them, and then really assessing if we're not a fit at all. Like I pride myself on really disqualifying candidates in that regards and just being like, Alpha's not a fit for them. Of course, same way as being on a sales call, everyone's like, why'd you do that? Like you push them in a different direction. Like they're gonna find out anyway. They're
Right.
just gonna join Alpha, realize it's not a fit, and then go get another job. You want that to happen in 6 months, or you want to know now, right? So I'm all about the leading indicators of what's going to be a mutual fit, whether it's your customers or your employees.
I mean, the thing that does is you become a trusted advisor, right? On the sales calls. And, you never know. These people might circle back, boomerang back 2 years, 3 years down the road. Like having your trust and your transparency, I think is incredible. It's what I try to do as well. Another question in that kind of hiring bucket: who was your most underrated hire? So someone either for a role, you don't have to call it names unless you want to, but either for a role where you really had a functional gap and this person came in and blew you away, or you brought somebody in to do one thing and they ended up crushing it in a bunch of other areas too.
We are fortunate to have a number of people that fit that criteria at Alpha. I think we we can pride ourselves on hiring people who grow into their roles and their opportunities, which is great. I'd love to give a shout out to my team, which is the product team. I think we have 3 product managers who started with completely different roles, completely different backgrounds. One in customer success, one in UX, and one in like research, and kind of all grew into the product roles from different areas, different exposures, and kind of different passions. And they provide a completely different lens to everything we do. I think our customers appreciate it. It gives us a ton of diversity in thought and background on the team to be able to, match people to problems that they're well equipped to handle. And so I just think they've really kind of grown into the roles and really leaned into all the challenges that come with learning a new role in a fast-paced company, in a fast-paced industry, and right now a very fast-paced world. So I think they've really grown into it. And what I've seen them do is just um, be okay not knowing the answers to things. Like just be okay um, not being experienced. And they all have mentors, outside the company. They go to events. Like they're passionate about the craft. They've taken a passion about the product management discipline. And I think it takes that, like really for any role or for anyone to lean into something, they have to be able to talk about it all dinner with a bunch of people who don't care.
Yeah, they have to be obsessed with what they're doing. Yeah, that's awesome. Talk about, so I know a lot of times successful companies will build at various stages, but usually at the beginning will build this kind of informal or formal advisory board where they go to for consistent mentorship. Did you guys do that early on? And what did that look like? And what's some of the advice you got early on from those people?
Yeah, we didn't. One of the reasons we didn't isn't there are plenty of great advisors. So we have like informal advisors to the business. We have executive coaches and executive advisors. So to some extent we have it, but like a formal or anything near a formal advisory board, no. I think there's a few reasons to it. We were very cognizant early on, and I would recommend entrepreneurs who find themselves in a similar situation. We wanted to be very, very agnostic about everything. There are a lot of buzzwords in any new industry as it's emerging. In our case, it was lean, agile, design thinking, design sprints, um, digital transformation, any number. We did not want to associate with any specific term because it burned us very, very early on. I remember we went to onboard a customer and we said it was lean experimentation, and they're like, "Oh, we may have bought the wrong thing. Like we just invested in design thinking," and we're like,
Yeah, you're like, I just made that up.
yeah, yeah, exactly. We're like, oh, that's what we meant to say, design thinking, right? Like fundamentally, the principles underlying all these things are like 80% overlapping and 20%, some nuances that anyone could customize as they needed, right? And so we were just very cognizant. A lot of advisors at that time would have come from like a very specific like design thinking background or lean or customer discovery or experimentation. And we just wanted to actually not align with anything because we were seeing enough demand for just like plain English, like testing and customer feedback that we just want to be like, we'll just do that and avoid, association with anything else.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I think I want to talk about self doubt a little bit. I think self doubt, there's like an inverse relationship between product market fit and self doubt. The longer you go without product market fit, the more you can start to doubt. But and it sounds like with you guys, since you had the consulting business early on, you were able to get some of that initial product market fit validation. But was there ever a point in the process where you personally experienced self doubt, like, oh, this might not be the right thing, or for you, why am I working on this problem? And talk us through that a little bit.
Absolutely. I don't. There's rarely a week that goes by where there's not at least a day where that happens, either at a personal level or a business level. I know that's true of all the companies I've invested in. It's true of the companies I advise. It's true at Alpha. It's true of a lot of the founders I talk to. So, like at a personal level, of course, imposter syndrome since day one. I had just turned 22 when I co-founded this, so I knew nothing about product management, knew nothing about a corporate world. This is the biggest company I've ever worked at. I've never had formal reports and a boss and all that. So trying to empathize with our customers and trying to write content for them and develop resources and help kind of accelerate the development of this industry, there's always been imposter syndrome. It's not really a way to solve that. There are like techniques, but otherwise just like put your head down, keep hustling, and eventually you go from imposter to like you belong to theoretically one day aspirationally an expert. And so that's at a personal level. At a business level, yeah, for sure. I think every market right now is changing rapidly. That was true before the pandemic and is particularly true now. And so um, every company is going to have imposter syndrome because the product market fit is always going to be changing. Like the moment you're not an imposter, the next day you're an imposter. And so to go back to what we talked about earlier, like there was a day where like the buyers loved us, didn't compare us to anything. And then, we felt like imposters when we were rolling it out to their teams who didn't get it. Today, we feel great to rolling out to the teams because they get it and they adopt it early, but we feel like imposters when we're competing against like, four different solutions, two of which we don't even think are really even fit competitively. And we're confused now about what the customer wants, right? And so it seems like it shifts overnight. And I'm sure in 3 years, it'll be something else. Like it'll be for hopefully a better problem. Like we're rolling out an enterprise-wide solution and we're just misaligned on how big the opportunity is.
Yeah, hope, fingers crossed.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
exactly.
it. Let's talk about struggles a little bit, which is kind of a corollary to self doubt. But what do you think is your biggest, most pressing question right now? Kind of like what keeps you up at night? As you look ahead, besides the pandemic, but like product wise or product market fit wise.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a few things. I think um, it's every founder and every executive team is always thinking about the people. Like one, they want to take care of the people. Are they safe and healthy? Which right now, obviously, tantamount concern. But even generally, like, are the people they have, are they set up to succeed now and in the future? And you always run into that issue of like, I read this. I think it was the Wall Street Journal does the conference twice a year, and it was the one in California on the future of work. And there was this amazing guest speaker who was just like, he did a workshop on leadership, and he was just like, every single problem in the company is the CEO's fault, right? Like at some point, the root cause is like you hired the people, you set the culture, you did all that, right? And I thought that was like fascinating because like to some extent it's true, and to some extent, of course, it's not. But I think the mentality of like start the blame in the leadership team and then work backwards. So if someone fails at the company, like, well, then what did the leadership team do wrong? Like that's, I want to start there first because I think a lot of people start reactively. Like, how do we correct this? How do we, drive accountability? How do we like discipline this employee or set them up to succeed? And I always start with like, did we set them up to succeed? Like, what are the things we did? Did we hire wrong? Do we have to adjust the interview process? Like, I start like all the way upstream, right? And so I think that's something I'm always thinking about, which is like, what are the things we aren't doing now that are going to set us up for success in 6 to 12 months? Because the reality we're living right now was set up 6 months ago. Like, there's nothing I can do about this now. We can set up of course we can like adjust on the fly and reconcile something in real time for sure. But like long term, if you want to grow year over year over year and be in business in 5 to 10 years and be a massive corporation, like you have to be building now for how you're going to operate in 6 months.
Yeah. And that's so something that, where I work, I don't think they do a great job, but I'm curious to hear your take on this. I didn't have this written down, but I think we have similar views on a lot of things. So I'm curious, how do you continue to personalize that experience at scale as you scale? So like for me, I think every single person has different things that motivate them, different things that drive them, different ways they want to be rewarded, right? Comp, equity, attaboy, pat on the back, whatever it is. How do you, because early on, it's easier when you know the 12 people and you know them personally. How do you do that at scale?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a big proponent of decentralizing and of empowering, managers, right? Managers, directors. Obviously, at a company of 70 people, we don't have that many levels, so I'll just call it managers, right? And empowering them, right? Whether that's decentralizing budgets and decentralizing decisions, because the we hire these people, we presumably trust them. If they misuse that trust and prove that we made a mistake, then like I said, first I want to go to like, how did this happen on us as a leadership team? Where did we go wrong? Let's adjust that and make sure it doesn't happen again in the future, and then we can reconcile this situation, right? But otherwise, like, let's presume that we're hiring competent people and that we're coaching them and setting them up to succeed, and then they're closest to the problem. Like, in a rapidly changing world, it's impossible for a centralized leadership team, no matter how smart, no matter how much data, to make all those decisions, right? You're just going to be behind on everything all the time, right? And I've seen it, and that's just what happens. So the only way to do it is to empower people close to the problem and equip them with the resources and the capability to make the right decisions in real time and figure out what works for their team and what doesn't. Now, of course, at a certain level, it gets hard to collaborate cross-functionally with that. And that's when you need like dedicated roles for cross-functional collaboration. I think some really forward-thinking company one day came out and said, we need revenue ops, and we need marketing ops, and we need design ops and dev ops. And I think now we're seeing the emergence of product ops. I think we will see the emergence of, I was talking to some friends the other day, of remote ops, like people who actually facilitate just remote work across different teams and departments that like to work differently. Engineers who can't have staggered meetings all day, but executives who love having staggered meetings all day. Well, how do you make that work? Tools like Clockwise are really interesting, right? And so I think there are other ways to solve communication, cross-functional collaboration at scale rather than centralization. And so that is kind of a roundabout way of answering the question there.
Yeah, for sure. Let's go to. I want to talk about sacrifices a little bit. When you start a company, I started a company for like a year and a half, so I know this a little bit, but not to the extent you do. Talk about like from a personal, social perspective. What does that sacrifice look like, and how do you grapple with it?
Yeah, that's a tough one because I think the hardest part about it is how blinded you are to the sacrifice you're making. Because when you're in the weeds and you're building the company, um, it's all consuming. It's all time consuming, and you presumably love it. Maybe you hate it, but you love that you hate it, and whatever sort
Yeah.
of twisted psychology there is there. But like you feel passionate about something, and generally most of the people around you are miserable all the time because people hate their jobs and they hate what they're working on, and all you think about is you wish you could share this experience you're having with them, but you can't because you can't. Like they don't want to start a company, they don't want to leave their cushy job, and to some extent you think like they just feel the grass is greener. They don't realize like you're starting companies really hard. They have a salary, they have a happy family. Like they're not really miserable, or they shouldn't be miserable, even though they act as though they are. And so what I'm getting at though is that you have to prioritize the relationships you have, and you don't even realize you're doing that. You don't even realize the sorts of happy hours you don't show up to, the birthday notes you forget to send, the birthday presents you forget to send. And in your head, you're always kind of like, people understand. I'm working on a startup. I'm busy. And then like 5 years go by and you haven't talked to some people and you realize you don't even get invited to their birthdays anymore. And the weird part about the sacrifice is that you're generally okay with it. Like you would do it again if you had to. Like you couldn't have done both the startup and maintained every friendship from college. Like those two cannot coexist, right? Or it's very, very difficult. I'm sure there are people who manage work-life balance and can do it, and by all means, like if you can, great, but at some point something's got to give, right? And so I think the hardest part about the sacrifice is that you don't even realize you're making it. You don't even realize how many people you lost touch with and all that until one day it just kind of hits you and you realize you're okay with it, but it doesn't mean it doesn't suck.
Yeah. Do you think you came back to the middle on that equilibrium yet, or it's still, you guys are grinding so hard, scaling so fast, you're still kind of over there? I mean, at least you're aware. It sounds like you're aware of it.
Yeah, there are periods I go of doing that, but I've found that it's better just to realize that this could potentially be the rest of my life,
Yeah.
whether alpha
And
or
it is what
something
it
else.
is.
Yeah, it is what it is. So instead of spreading myself thin, feeling guilty, and maintaining like superficial relationships with a lot of people, I'd rather just say, hey, here are the whatever 5 to 15 people that are just going to matter to me, be important no matter how busy I get, and I'll just spend my time on them. And every other person, like, they didn't do anything wrong. It's just, and some of them are family, like some of them are like cousins. I just like I can't.
There's not
There's
enough hours in the
Yeah, there's
day.
just not enough hours in the day. Like my conversations are just going to be a happy birthday every year, and there's just not really anything else I can do. And to some extent, it's a life I choose, and maybe some people will think I'm an asshole, and then so be it.
Yeah, for sure. So kind of analogous to that a little bit is founder mentality. So I want you to talk about, as I have these conversations, I start to realize all of these founders, all the good founders have a set of core characteristics that are, interchangeable but consistent across the group. In your mind, what do you think it takes from a characteristic perspective or a mentality perspective to make a good founder?
Um, the first thing I'd say is both thick and thin skin, right? So like thick long-term skin, thin short-term skin, right? So by that I mean like long-term, you've got to be resilient. You're gonna take a lot of no's for every yes. You got to be able to like anything from like cold call to just like taking out the garbage in your company. Like I assembled all the furniture in our first two offices, right? So you've just got to like be able to like literally eat shit, right? And then second is the thin skin in that like being ruthlessly self-critical and like taking all feedback. It doesn't mean acting on it because by the way, a lot of feedback and a lot of criticism is just wrong, right? And so, but it's really about like taking it all, processing it all, looking for patterns, and if a real pattern emerges, being receptive to it and changing. Personally, I've taken a lot of feedback over the years. I think there are a lot of things that I've worked to improve on. Some of it is about some things that just come easier to other people that don't come easy to me, like direct feedback. I've been asked a lot to be more direct. People felt when I was younger I beat around the bush. I didn't, make my points clear. I didn't want to hurt people's feelings, and then all it did was end up creating misalignment down the line, and I saw that. So that's something I've worked on, being more direct. And so just for any founder, like knowing your weaknesses and having a kind of a personal backlog of things you're working on based on feedback, I think is really important. I'm sure there's a number of other things I see in common with founders all the time. But it generally has to do with like getting out of your comfort zone, because as a founder, to some extent, you're going to be doing every job, or at least have to have familiarity with every job. So if you only stay in the space, if every one of your days looks like every one of your days before it, because you like doing a certain thing and you don't want to let that go or let someone else do it, or work on something you don't want to do that you have to do, like legal paperwork and fundraising, like probably not going to be a very good founder unless you're like incredibly lucky. I read like David Karp, the founder of Tumblr, like never left his office and was coding until the end. So like by all means, if you can pull that off, do that.
He must have had a co-founder or someone
Yeah.
directly working with him that handled everything else.
He had Yahoo willing to pay $1 billion. So there you go.
Yeah, exactly. So I want to talk about quickly morning routine. Do you have one? What does it look like? I know a lot of people, there's been a lot of research around this where a lot of successful people wake up early in the morning and do all these crazy things. Do you have one, and what does it look like?
I do have a very regimented routine. I would say it has more to do with my um, personal life and philosophies on like fitness than anything else, only because I started it about 2 years ago. I lost 50 pounds 2 years ago. I was a bit of a heftier dude back then.
Congrats.
Thank you. Thank you. It was a long journey. I wrote about it on Medium. One of the most eye-opening experience in my life going through it. Um, Long story, started with calorie counting and then got very obsessed with Peloton. So that's part of the morning routine is, yeah, I do wake up within a 15-minute span every day without an alarm clock. Somehow your body just kind of gets into that biological rhythm. The problem with that, of course, is that it extends to the weekends as well. So I am up at 6:45 on weekends, sending emails, and people think I have no life. And I fall asleep at 10 p.m. on a Friday night.
Yeah.
And then uh, always a super coffee. It's called Keto Super Coffee. I'm a big fan of their brand. Um, I knock out some emails in the morning. I do some writing usually in the morning, so like about an hour of working. I either do Peloton or Fight Camp, which is like at home boxing, which I'm a big
Yeah,
fan
fight
of as
camp's
well.
cool.
Fight Camp's, yeah, awesome. Um, if the weather's really good, which today it is, I'll go for a run. But usually it's Peloton or Fight Camp. Peloton is always to Alex Toussaint. He is like my spirit animal. He's my hero. Kicks my ass every morning, and then generally like a morning routine after that. Like showers, stuff like that, and then answer some more emails, and then I have a stand up with the product team at 10 a.m. Try not to have any meetings before 10 a.m. because you can just get behind on your day so quick if you don't answer stuff that comes in overnight.
I'm the same way. 10 a.m.
Yeah.
is kind of the
Yeah.
ideal line.
Yeah. And then breakfast is cottage cheese. I do good cultured cottage cheese in case
That's
anyone.
it. Just cottage cheese.
Yeah, it's got cottage cheese with fruits in it, just in case anyone's out there. I'm lactose intolerant, but I've learned that cottage cheese doesn't really have an impact. I guess something to do. I don't really understand how cheese works, but my
Yeah.
fiance's got a master's in public health and told me cottage cheese doesn't count.
Yeah. Fair enough. All right. 3 more questions. So learning and resources. So you've littered the interview a little bit with some, but as you've kind of gone along, any books you've read, or you said you don't listen to podcasts, but YouTube channels you follow, or articles, newsletters you follow that you'd recommend to someone either interested in entrepreneurship or an aspiring founder starting out?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a good question. It's actually one of the questions I ask in interviews as well. To that I've learned it really helps get to the mutual fit. Like, what are they curious about? What First of all, are they a curious person? I think that's something all startups are going to ask about. But like, what are the things they're trying to learn more about? Um, we've had some people, and by all means, sometimes people are just curious about really good things. They're just not a fit. We've had some people that were really interested in like non-governmental work and charity and nonprofit, and I was just like, how? So what
Yeah.
other
Where's the
opportunities are you
where's the
looking at?
connect?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they were looking at like working in like local government. And I was like, I don't know if this is going to be a fit for you because like, we're not even a profitable company. We're not going to have like charitable campaign. Like we do. Yeah. We donate to like COVID, but like it's not going to be like Salesforce
They're
where
like,
like,
you're nonprofit. You're like, yeah, but a different
yeah,
different
different
kind.
kind of nonprofit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not profitable. Yeah. So in terms of resources, so I'm a big fan of Stratechery, Ben Thompson. It's a paid newsletter, which I secretly, confidentially forward to a bunch of people at the company every day. You're not supposed to, but I have like 2 or 3 personal subscriptions, so I feel like it's okay. Alex Danko has a really good newsletter on business and SaaS and finance. Um, I'm not a big book reader. When I do read, it's business books, it's nonfiction, like Nassim. I read a lot on Nassim, Crossing the Chasm, stuff like that. Follow a lot of people on Twitter, pretty much cliche entrepreneurial people I follow. Naval, Nassim, Ben Thompson from Stratechery, people like that.
Yeah, I'll layer in a sub question here. So I subscribe to email newsletters too, and I feel like in my day, like sometimes I don't have a consistent approach to making sure I read them every single day. Do you have any tricks for that, or you just get up so early that you've carved out that 15 minutes for it every day?
No, I just unsubscribe to everything else. That is literally all I get. I get the skim, so I know only because I've learned that is traditionally what people under a certain age are reading for their news. So I read it just to know what like the rest of the world
He's
reads for
talking
the news.
about.
Yeah, it's talking about.
Yeah.
Like I personally read so I guess I read pretty much the entire Wall Street Journal every day if I can, at least skimming through the lead of every article. And so that's where I'm getting the news, but I like to know the news that everyone else is reading. So I'll read the skim, which I feel
Pop
like kind
culture
of
news.
captures it. Yeah.
Yeah. Makes sense. All right. So final 2 questions. We ask these questions to every single person on the show, and they've been really successful so far. So the first one is startup manifesto. So if you had to write a startup manifesto with 5 of the most important key lessons or pitfalls to avoid when starting out, what would they be?
Yeah. So I wrote some notes here, and I actually think we covered almost all of them in this. So that's kind of cool. So first is to invest in validated opportunities, but be patient about experiments, right? I think a lot of companies get that backwards. They are not patient about experiments, and they invest in things that are experiments way too early. And then when they don't scale or they don't resonate, like sometimes markets just take time to evolve. And I think one of the biggest red flags I ever see is when a company is like, we're 2 years in and here's what like the top percentile for another company 2 years in. Like every market is different. Every company is different. Like plenty of companies skyrocket for 3 years and then plateau, and plenty of companies are really slow for 3 years and then skyrocket. Like I just don't like these like kind of blanket comparisons across industries and all that. And so that's really true here. And then I think a lot of companies don't invest in validated opportunities soon enough. They just kind of like make it really painful to grow things that just need resources. So I think a lot of companies get that backwards. That's first. Second is what we talked about. Decide what you won't compete on. Decide the things you won't prioritize. Like call them out explicitly. What are you not competing on? What are you not prioritizing? Who are you not hiring? It's much easier to do that, I think, because people can understand that. Like when you say who you're hiring, like yeah, you want high performing people. Everyone does. But like, what are the things you don't want? Three is create a culture of incentives, not rules. And that goes to like democratizing stuff and is similar to what you won't prioritize. Like rules work at a moment in time and then quickly become outdated. Incentives generally transcend time a little bit better and also allow for a lot more experimentation and a lot more discovery and customization at team levels. Optimize for customers. So I've seen be customer driven. I've seen be customer obsessed. I think all those are kind of wrong. I don't even like the phrase like the customer is always right. That's definitely not true. Like there are, especially when you have network effects and externalities, there are customers who ruin the experience for every other customer. So that can't possibly be true on Facebook that the customer is always right. So I think optimizing on behalf of your customers is a better way to do that. Like do what's right for them, and that may include, like I said, telling them to use a competitor solution, right? So optimizing for your customer may mean telling them they shouldn't be a customer, right? And then I've got a few that could also go. Those were kind of like the four. I'll just pull up here at any given point. Like I have a bunch of them. I would say the last is really like take risks, but always stay in the game, right? And what I mean by that is like every venture is going to be risk taking, but to a certain point, you've got to like consolidate your gains and like consolidate and be like, okay, we need to make sure there's no single dependency or single risk. Like once you can breathe and have enough funding, and like there's no single risk that could wipe us out of the game. Like whether it's like we have a third party tech dependency where we are relying on one platform and they're a big company and we assume that's going to work out. And we assume like AWS will always be up, but like you should probably have a backup of all that data and be able to spin it up on another platform pretty quick. Like those sorts of things, like take risks, but like manage your risk. And I think that's something probably a lot of companies that it would have been a good tip to give everyone 6 months ago. But like diversify. Still like biased toward risk taking, but like not a single risk that could wipe you out of the game because you can't come back from that.
Yeah, incredible. That's a great list. And then the last question is a nomination. So it's your turn to nominate another founder that is either a friend, colleague, or a mentor of yours that you'd like to see on the show. It's a really great way for the show to grow and been a successful so far.
Sure. Yeah. So I would nominate Bill Tyndall, who was one of the founding executives at Electric.ai, of which we are a customer. They are making kind of a lot of the IT capabilities more scalable through Slack integration and through kind of an IT bot in Slack that helps people set up security on their laptops, work remotely, troubleshoot any sorts of problems. It's really cool technology, really cool idea. Wish I was an investor, all about like scaling artisanal there, right? It's like doing all the things that don't scale at scale. And he's introduced me to a ton of people. I think his networking skills and ability to connect people and just always be helpful is, really inspiring and something I aspire to do more of. He's really smart, always sharing wisdom, always learning. So I would nominate him.
Amazing. Awesome. Thank you for that. So I want to acknowledge you quickly. I think something that's stood out to me from this interview is not only your tact, but like your approach to being like authentic in your opinions. And I think I like to call out everybody for something that I think is really, really awesome that I learned during the interview. And that's something that I think will never lead you astray. And I'm excited to kind of stay along for the ride with Alpha, hopefully as a customer and a fan, and see where you guys go in the future.
I appreciate that. It's definitely something, as I said earlier, working on being direct and authentic, and I appreciate the gratitude for that.
For sure. So just if anyone hears this and wants to follow you or follow Alpha, do you want to one chance to plug kind of your social, Alpha's website, and the podcast?
Yes. So opposite ends of the spectrum here. I have a very unique name that I compete with nobody. So if you just search Nis Frome, Nisfrome, you will, even if you just search Nis, I think I'm still on the first page. So very little competition for a short name there. You'll find me on LinkedIn. I have a website. I'm on Medium. Alpha, opposite end of the spectrum, you will never find. So that's alphahq.com. We made it a little bit more nuanced so that we could stand out there.
Perfect. Nis Frome, founder of Alpha. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks, Kyle.
Thank you for listening to that episode with Nis Frome of Alpha. Remember, if you liked what you heard and want to support the show, there's a couple quick things you could do that would really help us out. One, subscribe to our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. If you go on Apple Podcasts, please leave us a 5-star rating and a couple sentence positive review on why the show inspired you. These ratings and reviews are super important, and they signal to Apple that they should put our show in front of other people that might like it. 2, follow us on social media, mainly Instagram and Twitter, at Founder Podcast. Each week we put out teasers, audio clips, and important quotes from the episode of the week. And 3, we're pumped to announce that our website for the show is now live. Go to www.thefounderpod.com as a mission control for the show. We have a page on there called Special Offers where we link up discount codes from our founders' companies, as well as the books and resources that have been recommended across all of our episodes. I hope you enjoyed that episode and are looking forward to the next one. Until then, I'm Kallaway, and this is The Founder.